Join us on a stroll through the Dublin Docklands for this year's Financial Justice Walking Tour of the IFSC. Our theme this year looks at economic justice from a feminist perspective. We recognise care work in our homes and communities as the fundamental activity reproducing our societies and economies. And yet, our financial system is set up to extract this wealth carelessly and in the interests of the few. In Ireland, the richest 2 billionaires have more wealth than the bottom half of the whole population. The world's 5 richest men have more than doubled their fortunes from 405 billion to 869 billion since 2020. Continuing on this trajectory of extreme wealth inequality will create the world's first trillionaire by 2027, Elon Musk. We invite you to take in the multiple perspectives shared here today and ask yourself, can we turn this around? How can we build a new world in the shell of the old?
As much as the trade union movement is for all and has done a lot of good for women, women still do not play the part that they should play in it. Larkin hit on the idea of having a women workers' union. This was the first wave of feminism. They still thought that the man should be the main breadwinner and that he should have a decent wage in order to provide for his family. A household wage as opposed to an individual's wage. So this is where we get the problem about women not having the same wages. Because when women did have to work, and just think about this for a minute, it's grand if you're married and you have a husband to support you or you have your father supporting you. But if you don't, what do? It's a very cold place, isn't it? But the women themselves also thought that women shouldn't have to work, okay? And Delia Larkin herself, she believed in votes for women, she was a suffragist, but she thought that what it should be is that the women in the home had a better life, but if they had to go outside the home, well then they should get better wages. Who ran the soup kitchens? The women. The Rosie Hackett Bridge down there, we fought to get a bridge named after a woman and a trade unionist. And Rosie has only come to prominence over the last few years. She actually printed the proclamation. She actually hid arms and everything in there for Connolly during the 1916 Rising. Unions are good for women, but they're not good enough. It's a bit like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. You always hear more about Fred Astaire, but Ginger Rogers did everything that Fred Astaire did, and she did it in high heels and go backwards.
Latin American women who decided to migrate are not only looking for a better professional and educational opportunities, they are aspiring above all to a life which is just, dignified and safe. However, this search for a better life also brings its own challenges and sacrifice, especially in a society which often makes prejudice and mistaken value judgments.
In Ireland, migrant women live in intersection between various forms of discrimination. Often, they are facing not only sexism, but racism, xenophobia, and social exclusion. The lack of the recognition of these realities in public places perpetuate a system where migrant women are invisible and without the necessary resources to fight for their rights, instead of being seen as individuals with specific needs and rights. Migrant women are treated as a cheap labor, essential for sectors like care work, cleaning, and hospitality, but without receiving in exchange the rights and protection they deserve. Migrants' rights must be recognized and respected through creating more support networks and adopting an approach based on feminist economics, so that people's needs, not economic growth, are at the center of the public policy.
It's always good to have the opportunity to speak about An Gorta Mór, the Great Hunger, the most pivotal moment in Irish history, and an event that has left a lasting impression on our culture and on our psyche. What I'm also thinking about today is, I suppose, the issue of misrepresentation, and the misrepresentation, particularly in this context, of women in terms of their role during An Gorta Mór. We're all familiar with the iconic image of Bridget O'Donnell and her two children, who are portrayed very much as victims, which they were, of An Gorta Mór. And they were featured in the London Times, an article telling their story. But significantly, we have never heard what happened to Bridget O'Donnell and her children afterwards. They were forgotten from history. The history books tells us they died of famine, but if the difference between famine and starvation is that famine is caused by natural forces, while starvation is man-made. In fact, non-potato agricultural produce in 1847, which is called Black 47, amounted to $46 million in value, an enormous sum capable of feeding twice the population of Ireland. But that food was not for the peasants who had no money, but destined as a cash crop for export. That explains why it was not only the coffin ships that left our ports, but ships loaded with barley, wheat, oats and cattle, 6 ships laden with food going out for every 1 ship with Indian corn coming in. Be shocked, but be not surprised. The same holds true today in much of the majority world. In Latin America, Africa and the Philippines, ships leave these hungry lands with huge quantities of food to try and repay their debt, their pound of flesh, to us in the wealthy West. Today, the coffin ships are back. They cross the Mediterranean every day, bringing an exodus of Palestinians, Somalians, Syrians, Libyans, Ethiopians, Iraqis and Kurds. People fleeing for their lives. The power and the significance of An Gorta Mór is that it's not history. It is present, lived reality for many of the people in the world.
Between 1848 and 1850, hundreds of teenage girls from Ireland, imbued with religion and morality, were sent by boat to Australia under the Earl Grey scheme to serve as wives, but were actually referred to as breeders. Many women during this time were forced into prostitution, often with devastating consequences, including things like being referred to the Magdalene asylums if they were found out what they were doing. So women managed their household resources, they nurtured families, they cared for the sick and the starving. This labour, as it is today, was often undervalued and invisible, despite being absolutely essential in sustaining their communities. And today we know that women around the world still fulfil these critical roles in caregiving, particularly in times of crisis, often without acknowledgement. Women were also involved in subsistence farming and often had knowledge of foraging and alternative food sources, something that's often left out of historical accounts. This highlights their capacity as environmental stewards. And many also organised community support networks to care for affected families, reflecting their deep kinship ties and their communal care, which are central tenets of ecofeminism.
Women play a vital role in all movements that affect our families and loved ones. The capitalist system that the state bows down to is not what provides the needs of our community. The needs of our communities are met and demanded for by the love of our nannies, mothers, aunts, sisters and nieces. The very ones that work for free in the home. The very ones that provide care for the young and the old. The very ones that waive education and career opportunities to meet the needs of others in the family. The very ones that are stigmatised and forgotten about in our government policies. It's the women who are not afraid to stand up, organise, mobilise and take action. It's the inner city women that created the sense of community where we all live today. The women before us fought for this vision, so the women today should continue on and fight for our rights. Women are the change makers.
As we walk around these spaces, so interestingly built, with huge amounts of glass, so interestingly created as mirrors on the society that we are as we walk past. How often could we look at those mirrors and wonder, as we fix our hair and have a little moment, what are those mirrors really hiding? Is it more about shame? than it is about us seeing us reflected in this space in which so much and so many are missing. We also could maybe give a little nod to Homo economicus, whose suit is clearly fraying at the lining, to the point where the emperor's new clothes may be completely falling away.
Very often what we hear about Irish, but actually most minority languages, is that they're not valuable because you can't get a job or you can't make money out of them. So we're turning that on its head today. Ní bheidh me laichí de rís an. Ní bheidh dó laichí de rís an. Ní bheidh ar laichí de rís an. Ní inan duine agus a fáim. Ní inan mínach agus a fáim. Is dúach gach duine agin ar waithe hain. Ní rómuid an seo riú. Ní bhéimmuid an seo a rís. Támuid an seo anis. In san am seo. In san áit seo. In our bhealach.
Facebook's main Irish subsidiary, Meta Platforms Ireland, brought in around $30 billion of revenue in 2018, accounting for more than half of the firm's total annual turnover of $56 billion. The Irish subsidiary recorded profits of more than $15 billion in 2018. Of those $15 billion in profits, they paid only $101 million in tax in Ireland, a small fraction. Amazon, Apple, Netflix and Google also have their European HQs here. This is linked to the rise in data centres in Ireland also, and we currently have 70 in the country, and they are now consuming 14% of Ireland's metered electricity, which is more than all of Ireland's rural homes put together. This is predicted to rise to 30% of Ireland's electricity by 2030. So one issue here is the particularities of how tech companies are using Ireland's tax laws to dodge tax, and it is of course complicated as an accounting procedure involving intellectual property licenses, but the outcome is simple. Companies are declaring profits here which they made in other countries, and therefore avoiding tax in those countries. Ireland's status as a tax haven has been in the news lately, with this week's European Court of Justice ruling ordering Apple to pay Ireland $13.1 billion in unpaid taxes after years of court cases. Far from seeking this payment, the Irish state has worked with Apple to counter these court cases.
We are not the same people who will be tomorrow, and by the time we leave here, we have morphed to something else. But what are we going to do with that morphing, with that change? Are we going to sit on it? How actively are we going to use it? And I think financial justice, Ireland, one of the fundamentals it talks about is how are we sharing our resources, and are we aware of the impact that they have, positively or negatively? We should count every impact in human terms, in bodies, in numbers of individuals, and then maybe the change will come.